By the spring of 1915, Europe was nearly a year into the First World War. In the waters around the British Isles, German U-boats scanned the horizon for ships targeting vessels involved in the Allied war effort. Well, on May 7th, one ship, the RMS Lusitania, crossed the path of a U-boat several miles off the English coast. The resulting attack not only precipitated America's entrance into the war, but many believe it changed the nature of modern warfare. A word of caution, some of the images you're going to be seeing during this next segment, they may be a bit disturbing. Take a look.
There had been passenger ships on the North Atlantic since 1840, but in 1907, the Cunard Line introduced the Lusitania. The Lusitania was the lead ship. She was the one that set the standard. The Lusitania sailed from New York, bound for Liverpool, her home port, May 1st, 1915. She was carrying just over 2,200 people. There was a sense of foreboding when she left. The day before she sailed, there appeared a series of advertisements reminding these passengers that a German-declared war zone existed around the British Isles. Any ship entering this war zone was liable to destruction without warning. On the 7th of May, she was approaching the south coast of Ireland. There was a heavy fog. It burned off by mid-morning, but Captain William Turner, her skipper, decided that he needed to know exactly where he was. He had received a series of messages in the previous 24 hours warning him of the activity of German U-boats at various points around Ireland. Around 1 o'clock, he decided to take what was known as a four-point bearing. It's a complicated procedure that requires the ship to steam on a straight line course with no alteration of speed for about 45 minutes. What Turner didn't know was there was a German U-boat out there, the U-20, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Walter Schwieger. Schwieger was tracking the Lusitania, and when Turner altered his course to begin taking his four-point bearing, he turned right across Schwieger's bow. Schwieger ordered a single G-type torpedo fired at the Lusitania. At 2:10 p.m. on May 7th, 1915, that torpedo struck the Lusitania. 18 minutes later, she was at the bottom. Those minutes began in confusion. They progressed into terror and ended in catastrophe. Half the lifeboats were unusable. There were a couple of attempts to try and launch the boats there that ended in terrible failure. Remember, this ship is thundering forward at 18 knots. The speed is not off of her. She's going down. There are screams, there are cries. One of the most tragic incidents was in one of the nurseries where there were babies that were unattended that in pure terror were crying out, and their cries only ceased when the water came into the nursery and drowned the little ones. It was literally every man and woman for himself right from the start. Ultimately, 1,198 people died. Around the world, people were stunned by the audacity of the attack and by the sheer loss of life. There was a complicated set of protocols that were known as the cruiser rules, which set down the guidelines for how a warship should act when stopping and seizing or, if necessary, destroying an enemy civilian vessel. One of the strict provisions of the cruiser rules was that the warship should allow the civilians an opportunity to take to the lifeboats before any action against the ship itself was taken. Now, the German rationale for this unannounced attack was that the Lusitania was carrying a cargo of munitions, rifle ammunition, and 3-inch shrapnel shells. The thing is, the British didn't think the Germans would go so far as to attack passenger ships, So as early as the late fall of 1914, they began shipping cargoes of munitions, war materials, artillery on British passenger liners, believing that the passengers, the civilian men, women, and children aboard these ships, would serve as a shield for these military cargoes. The German government finally, deliberately blurred the line between civilians and combatants, between the soldier in uniform and the home front with everyone in civilian clothes. This began an erosion of the standards by which warfare would be conducted for the rest of the 20th century. It was an attitude that would first start to manifest itself in the Spanish Civil War in 1937 with the bombing of the city of Guernica, with horrible loss of life. The city of Guernica had no military value, but the fear struck in the hearts of the civilians in the city was incredible. It was followed 3 years later by the bombing of Rotterdam in May of 1940, by the London Blitz. There was no concept of precision bombing. This was area bombing. The same thing happened in the Pacific. The rape of Nanking. Fast forward this, if you will, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's a process that began on May 7th, 1915. It was inevitable from the minute that Schwieger fired that torpedo. And the consequence was that war, as Winston Churchill put it, had ceased to be cruel and glorious, and instead became cruel and sordid.